So I've been getting messages from people saying, are you gonna do some Black History videos, brother? Because we like some of the videos you put up in the past. So I wanted to make sure to put some out, but I want to make sure I found some stories of people that most people don't know about. So there's a brother named John Horse, and he was part of the Black Seminoles. Now a lot of people don't know about the Black Seminoles. I sure wasn't taught that in school, that black people was part of the Seminole tribe. Well, I want you to hear the story behind this brother, and we back to talk about it.
It's hard to imagine that Hollywood hasn't jumped all over this. You would think it would be box office gold because it's part Spartacus and part Braveheart and part Amistad and part Glory with a little bit of Dances with Wolves thrown in. A story decades long of oppression and freedom fighting. I don't understand why there hasn't been more attention to John Horse and the Black Seminoles, but hopefully we can correct this. John Horse and the Black Seminoles deserve to be remembered for a number of reasons. They created the largest haven in the U.S. South for runaway slaves. They led the largest slave revolt in U.S. history. They secured the only emancipation of rebellious slaves prior to the U.S. Civil War, and they formed the largest mass exodus of slaves across the United States, moving from the Florida Everglades through Indian Territory, what would become Oklahoma, eventually locating in Mexico, where they secured title to their own land. It's a remarkable story. It's overlooked not just by filmmakers, it's not well known in popular culture, and in fact it's been overlooked by historians of slavery, if you can believe it. In the early 18th century, two groups in particular fled the colonial South into Spanish Florida, into the Everglades. One of these groups were Seminoles, who were migrating from the various colonies, just trying to avoid white encroachment, basically, trying to move someplace that white colonists weren't. And the other group was runaway slaves, people who were fleeing and trying to create a free life for themselves. Both were welcome in Florida, and in fact, the Spanish crown offered runaway slaves their freedom if they would defend the land for the crown, for the Spanish. So a mixed society emerged in the Everglades of intermarriage, family intermingling between these runaway slaves and the Seminoles. And in fact, the first legally sanctioned black free town in the North American continent was in the Spanish Florida Everglades. After the American Revolution, people living in the southern states didn't really like living that close to a large armed population of former slaves, particularly when they were in league with the local Native American nation, the large armed group of free Seminoles. And they knew that their own slaves felt free to run away and be harbored by this group. They knew that they were welcomed. And so from George Washington's administration on, there was questions of what do we do about the problem of the Florida Everglades. In 1818, this was James Monroe's administration, General Andrew Jackson actually moved into Florida, invaded it, not authorized to do so. He was actually pursuing justice against those who'd attacked Fort Scott in Georgia, but he did it anyway. He went into Florida and claimed it for the United States. When he seized the peninsula, he took the opportunity to execute some of the people who opposed him and also to clean out some of the areas of former slaves and Seminoles because he felt that this would make it better for annexation. The United States then soon actually bought Florida from the Spanish. When Jackson became president, he decided to make sure that the black Seminole communities were moved out by force. So he pursued this in his policy, his larger policy of Indian removal. This led to the Second Seminole War, which was 1835 to 1842, and became the largest and costliest of the so-called Indian Wars. Because the two communities were tied together, that is, the former slaves and the Seminoles, When the Seminoles were attacked in the Seminole War, this led to an uprising of the former slaves. In April of 1836, Black Seminoles and their Indian allies moved together to create what was the largest slave rebellion in U.S. history. This wasn't just a matter of runaway slaves. More than 385 plantation slaves ran away from their masters and joined the Black Seminoles, essentially in laying waste to the Florida sugar mills, which were some of the most valuable plantations in the whole continent. One Seminole leader at the time was the leader Osceola, who is justly remembered by history. Another leader who rose up at this time was John Horse, who was ethnically a Black Seminole, and who would ultimately lead his people on a long and trying exodus for their freedom. In 1838, John Horse and the Black Seminoles agreed to stop fighting the U.S. government in exchange for moving to what was then considered to be Indian Territory, which is now today the state of Oklahoma, and for legal recognition of their freedom. So despite the fact many of them were runaway slaves, they would have the opportunity to start over again as free individuals. Once they moved from the Everglades to Indian Territory, however, they found that their freedom was under attack, both by whites and by other Native Americans. In 1848, a decade after they had made the agreement with the U.S. government, the U.S. Attorney General announced that the government never had the authority, the power to recognize their freedom. And in fact, they were still, those who had been slaves, still enslaved. This was like opening season on them, basically declaring that they were there for the picking. And so they did the only thing they could do. They fled once again. Without security in Indian Territory, Horse and his Seminole ally Coacuchi promptly went to Mexico, where slavery was already illegal and had been for a couple of decades. There, Horse became famous as a general in the Mexican army, and his people found a way to make a life. Once they relocated to Mexico, things changed. When slave catchers from the Republic of Texas went over the border to try to find the runaway slaves, now free men, they met resistance not only from the Black Seminoles, but also from the Mexicans and the Mexican army itself. Eventually, the Black Seminoles, led by Horse, gained legally recognized Mexican land, nacimiento. Why isn't this recognized today? Well, for one thing, historians tend to be historians of Native American history or historians of slavery, but there's not many that move among these subjects, and it's a bit confusing because you have both the issue of runaway slaves and the issue of Native Americans kind of blended together, so it seems to fall through the cracks. Tradition is that Nat Turner's rebellion is the big turning point in the history of slavery and slave revolt, but that happened before the rebellion of the Black Seminoles, so it doesn't really fit the traditional trajectory. And perhaps most importantly, it really represents a blemish on U.S. history, not only because of the poor treatment of Native America as represented by the Seminole War, not only the poor treatment of African Americans through the device of slavery, but also because this group really did manage to negotiate a separate peace with the U.S. government, and 10 years later the government turned their backs on them. So it's, in multiple ways, a difficult story for people of the United States to tell. But it's worth remembering that a community of freedom fighters trekked from Florida to Oklahoma to Mexico and found, ultimately, peace and freedom and prosperity in lives that they could direct as their own. I recommend highly the website johnhorse.com for more information.
When I heard about this brother, I was like, wow, why wasn't I taught about this man in school? Why is it that my education was cheated? I don't know nothing about this country. I don't know nothing about the Indian Wars. I don't know nothing about this brother or any of these figures in history. But yet they made sure to hide this stuff from everybody. They don't teach the kids stuff like this because you know why? It shows that those European colonial settlers were not nice people. That they were very savage in nature, all the killing and maiming they was doing to people. Now you saw that the Indians and the runaway slaves was in one area of Florida. Now Spain was like, look, slaves, y'all can be over here, just fight for us. They were like, cool, no problem. Y'all, you giving us a place to be. And them people minding their own business. And who come bothering them? Like always, the U.S. government at that time period. Won't leave them alone. Same thing happened with Black Wall Street. You're in your area, minding your business, not bothering them, and here they come to try and destroy your town. It's just a repeat of the same thing over and over and over that has happened to the Native American and the black man and black woman here in this country. But they don't want to talk about these stories. The woman asked why Hollywood haven't jumped on this. The reason why Hollywood have not jumped on this, they do not want to show the truth of this nation. They want to show that everything just great and, nobody is just bad in the past and, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings or make people feel bad or whatever. Man, forget that. This is what happened in this nation. This is American history, and we need to talk about it. Because if you don't talk about it, you don't share it, it could be something that could be repeated. And forget that. Now, one thing I liked in this particular story is the unity that it had within the black, Native American, and Mexican communities. As you heard, when they end up going to Mexico, they bought land down there. Those slave masters in Texas trying to come get slaves, and the Mexican army stood up against them and say, no, you're not going to come down here and do this stuff. Even the brother was even like a general in the Mexican army. And, I remember one time I was told that they had a black man as president of Mexico, and it really intrigued me. I said, what? So I did some research on my own a while back and found out that was true. And I was like, how black people was the president of Mexico, and how black people end up down there? And then when I started finding out some other things, I was like, wow, man. I said, I was just lied to in my education so much. I mean, it's like, what else they have been lying to us about? Now, you notice this unity that they have, and now we don't have that unity today. You know why this unity isn't here with us today? Because those in power made sure to separate our communities and sow discord among our communities. We have more things in common than we do apart. Let's talk about genetically. Do you know the father and mother of the Native American is the African and the Asian? They got together, start having kids. That's where Native American came from. Do you know that the Native American and the Spaniard got together, start having kids? That's where the origins of the Mexican people come from. Translation, all of them have African DNA in every last one of them. So we all connected all the way around. So it's natural to get along with somebody you connected to some way, form, or fashion. Even if it's way back in the past, you still connected to the African people. But the thing is, it's sad we don't have that unity today. That you have, sometimes you have some Hispanics that hate blacks and blacks hate Hispanics. And well, I can't say much about Native Americans because they kind of just stay in the area. You don't really see them a whole lot. But the thing is, they made sure to bust us up and not have us together and have this hate fest of each other when we actually have more in common than anything. Now, the thing with this story with this brother, it proves that, we were fighters. It proves that we just didn't take everything. We wasn't just victimized 24/7. That we rose up and say, no, you are not going to treat us like that. You're not going to put us down like that. They like to teach us that we were victims all the time. A lot of us have adopted that we were victims and that we were just so oppressed and everything. But yet they don't never teach about none of the slave revolts. They never talk about that. How brothers and sisters got together and got even guns and everything and went at slave master too and killed a lot of them too. Because they don't teach that. They want us to forever think that we were just some slaves and we just got our freedom, not too long ago because of the stuff with Dr. King. They don't talk about the other people in the civil rights movement, like Malcolm X. It has to be a figure that is someone that is easy to control their legacy and someone that can be easily relatable to, not somebody who can speak the truth. I mean, if this story don't teach you that how we've been lied to, how we have been given a story that makes the European settlers look good and not show the truth that what they actually did, and how it downplays everything that the African and the Native American and even the Mexican has done within this country or even in Mexico. I mean, it makes you wonder, what else have we been lied to in our education? What else? I mean, because it's sad how y'all lied to every last one of us about the history of this nation. Lies, lies, lies. But the wonderful thing about the internet, outside of just having fun on it and watching movies and videos or whatever, you can get educated. And I tell you, get educated on history. Please do. That way, you know what you're talking about. That way, you can feel more better about yourself. Because one thing about black people is that you don't know your history. You know nothing. That's why you in the state you're in, because if you learn your history and learn who you are, where you came from, you wouldn't be doing the things you're doing today, because that's so beneath you. The things you're doing today is just like something a peasant would do, because you come from kings and queens literally, but yet you're not acting like the people you came from. That's why the more I learn about this history, the more you learn about this history, it's going to stir something up in you to say, man, I got to do something great. I can't be sitting around here, fighting over Jordans and worrying about hair and just not being with my family like I was supposed to and making kids and all this other stuff. I mean, you got brothers and sisters in history that had led, fights, wars, that's trying to fight for our freedom. Native American people try to fight for their freedom. And yet this is what we doing today. We got to do better than that. But, shout out to John Horace and the Black Seminoles. They were some true warriors, and they did, what they could do in their time period. Hit me up in the comments, future commentaries, subscribe.